I couldn't think of a better place to spend my time today. And I certainly am hopeful that each of you, the participants that we have with our with my presentation today, can walk away with things that will be in your toolbox. So you'll be able to actually apply some of the things that we discuss into your role that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. But just as while I'm doing that, I can tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm hopeful that my screen is going to be sharing. So let's see if I can get that to go.
Yes. Good. We can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. So I certainly want you to know that this is I've been in public education for 25 years. I actually got my start teaching kindergarten in Indianapolis, Indiana. So if any one of you are from Indiana, I'm a Butler undergrad, so go Bulldogs. And so before I even student taught, though, you know, I had the pleasure of having a mentor. And I believe each of you has your mentors in your lives. And I still stay in touch with my mentor to this day. So I want to give a shout out to Dr. Ina Shelley. She has been instrumental in my development as a professional. And then I also got my start because my mother-in-law at the time was my girlfriend's mom, owned and operated her own preschool. And so I had this wonderful opportunity when I was in college. I was a first-generation college student, had no idea what I was doing. Actually played some college football. You know, no one in my family was an educator. And she's the one that said, hey, you want to spend some time in a preschool? And I said, what do you mean? Like go to a preschool and be with kids? And she said, yeah, I think you'd be really good at it. So about 20 minutes into that experience, I looked at her and I said, wow, I think I found what I want to do for the rest of my life. So one of my student teaching experiences was in a homeless shelter preschool in downtown Indianapolis, and really began to learn the value of equity, the value of putting yourself and others first, and making sure that you're meeting the needs of those that you serve. So that was kind of instilled into me very, very early in my career. So I feel very fortunate to have had such a wonderful start. So I was a classroom teacher for about eight years, taught kindergarten, first grade, student taught in preschool, and then became an elementary building principal. Then moved and transitioned from that into a central office role where I was an assistant superintendent for 4 years. And now this is another 4 years heading into my 5th year as the superintendent of Dundee Community Schools in Dundee, Michigan. So that gives you a little backstory of who I am so you are aware. But today we're going to make some connections, the power of positive communication. So what does today look like? So we need to make sure that we're focused in on learning strategies and how to communicate with your districts that you might have influence with or are part of, constructing your own elevator speech. So in the handouts, I did prepare and gave this to Partner Plan Act so you could have it. This is a planning sheet so that if you wanted to, I afforded you the ability so that you could take notes, maybe in items that you might have learned from the presentation, data that we'll talk about from the presentation, and then focus in on the individual audience maybe that you want to target. And then, of course, building your elevator speech, we'll do that later. And then questions you still have about the presentation. Maybe there's a couple of things that I might be able to answer later. I also want to talk to you today about understanding how relationships matter above all else. Came across the book probably about 6 years ago, Patrick Lencioni's book called The Advantage. And in that book, they talk about how positive culture trumps everything in an organization. And our job is to create in our roles that we each have a sense of positive culture. And so if you have positive culture, really the sky's the limit. You have the ability to make those relationships work. You have the ability to do the things that you need to do to make differences for students. In any of your roles, you have that ability. I also want to take some time to learn how to speak the language of the heart. So there's a very famous author, she's been celebrated time and time again, Mimi Bronski-Chainfield, that I want to open after we have another quick session here, because I want to do a quick poll. So, and then of course, while we're learning, want to have some fun. Being in a virtual world, you want to make sure that you're doing some things that are entertaining. So first, to create some interactiveness here, I know that my friends at Partner Plan Act starts with a question, right? So please type in, what is your current job right now in the polling feature So there's a helpful icon right now that says the poll is open. So if you are in your role as administrator or a director, or if you're a teacher, or if you're an instructional assistant, if you're a person who has a role with special education, if you're a speech and language pathologist, if you're a social worker, maybe you're just a parent or a volunteer. I'd really like to know what that looks like. And then once we close the poll, I would like to see what that audience, what you all are, because right now there are 77 of you. So
yeah, so I've launched it, Eddie, and we've gotten over half that have already responded. So I'm just going to give them a few more seconds. And so they have options of choosing early childhood provider, collaboration member, school staff, parents, or other, and they're going ahead and typing in the other positions in the chat box. And so I'm going to go ahead and close it now and share those results.
Yeah, and if you were slow, your fingers typed too slow, you weren't going to make it in the poll. Don't worry.
Yeah. So we have 38% that are child care, early childhood providers, and same 38% are other in the chat, and I see lots of folks typing in there. And then 21% are collaboration members, and 2% school staff, and 2% parents.
Okay. Well, that's a really good group. So I really appreciate everyone that participated in the poll, because that gives me a really good idea of the audience, so I can help to tailor our presentation even more. And then again, I just want to point out, that's why something like this, the elevator speech, even becomes more important, because as we know, each of you are a leader in the roles that you have. And I know that because even if you are a child care provider or an other, meaning a director, or if you're in a school staff position, and if you're a parent, if you're fortunate enough to be a parent, you're a leader because you are truly making a difference for the children that are in your lives, whether they're your own children or like me as a superintendent. My district, I have approximately 1,800 children, and I do have 2 sons myself. So I get to be a parent, but I also get to be the parent of approximately 1,800 children, and that goes from preschool all the way through grade 12 in my district. So I feel very fortunate in my role. So it just really is about scale and scope. So one of the things I want to share with you, and you can see by my book, this is a well-loved version of a book that I got. I've been a member of the National Association for Education of Young Children, and this is a member benefit book, I believe from the 1994 or 1992-93 school year. And I've been a member since 1994. And you can tell that this book is well loved. In fact, the page I'm reading to you from today is it's actually removing itself from the book. So there's a wolf at your door. And I think this kind of sets the tone of how I feel about what our roles are in education and how will you be able to communicate with your stakeholders. And you got to know your audience. And the big thing that I say to all of those that I come in contact with is you got to fight fact, or you got to fight fiction with fact. You got to make sure that you're making sure to do that. So on my slide, it says the wrong thing. It says fight fact with fiction. It says fight fiction with fact. You want to fight fiction with fact. So with that being said, I want to read this to you, and it won't take but a second. So it's called There's a Wolf at Your Door. Feeling stressed, overwhelmed, intimidated, finding yourself inarticulate, defensive, insecure, pulled and pushed by the pressures of persistent criticism, accusations, competition. Is your flame blowing out? And for me, my last day with our school, our last day for students is today. So the answer to all of those is yes, I am. Well, I'm here to help though. First, build a house of beliefs and commitments. Don't construct your house of sticks or straw. Too flimsy, any wolf can blow it over. Your house of beliefs and commitments must be made out of bricks, a strong, sturdy structure resistant to quaking events, unexpected knocks at the door. On every windowsill of your house, place signs facing inward. They are to read and remember. They state, bilingual classroom, 2 languages spoken here. About the bilingual, is your house of beliefs made of bricks? You are fluent in 2 basic languages. What are your 2 languages? Let's start with the first. This is the language of the spirit. This is the vocabulary of adventure, excitement, serendipity, delight, surprise, amazement, and imagination, curiosity, experimentation, integration, playfulness, humor. This is the language of the heart. This is the language of the ear inside your heart. Did you find it? And deep within all the hearts, if you listen, you can hear the arts. This is a sacred language of learning in an environment aglow with warmth, love, respect, trust, mutuality, and encouragement. In this language, the first syllable of fundamentals is celebrated. Fun. All who come to be with you share the motto of Italian children in the Regia Emilia program, live. Nothing without joy. This language speaks the spirit of wonder of learning. It lights the way for all of your children, all your prodigies, as you share special times, never to come again. The wolf at your door is interested in the spirit language. That's why you are bilingual. So you may ask, what kind of language will keep wolves from huffing and puffing, blowing down your house of beliefs and myself? Wolves at the door demand to know what you know you are doing at all times. They challenge you to be accountable, clear, concise, knowledgeable, and responsible. They want to know that you are thoroughly conversant in the latest terminology of institutionalized education. Now remember, this book, it was written in 1992-93. In this language, words like methodology, outcomes, objectives, skill master, time on task, assessment, standardized testing, and classroom management are all high on that vocabulary list. Learn them, know them, write them 50 times in your workbook. Use these in your sentences. As you can easily see, this is not the language of the spirit. About wolves, you may ask? Who are the wolves at your door? The wolf at your door may be a child, a cool, know-it-all, wiseacre kid. I've already heard that on my video. That's not the way to tell that story. Or the wolf may be a colleague. Don't you think your class needs more seat work? Want to borrow any of my dittos? Or the wolf may be a parent. Other teachers have their reading groups. Why don't you? Or the wolf may be an administrator. Me. Just exactly what is going on. The music is so loud and all that laughter. Where is the teacher? Or the wolf could be a community representative. Clearly, it's because of teachers like you, frill teachers, that the levy failed. We'll never catch up with the Japanese with such frivolity. Creativity is definitely out of the curriculum in this district. Back to the basics. Or the wolf might be. Can it be? Oh no. The worst wolf of all? Yourself? I couldn't possibly let a puppet give my spelling test. What a stupid idea. And I just don't have the nerve to put the silly stickers on the children's work. I feel like a laughingstock. You may still be a bit confused and about to ask, just how do I use my bilingual concept in my everyday life? Give me some real examples. Well, I'm here to help. So I can tell you firsthand that this speaker, she is brilliant and she was awesome. And so this is something that as an administrator, as a teacher, as in any of my roles that I've ever had, I really try to look at that and say, how do I speak bilingually? How do I know my audience? How can I say that, what I need to say to the audience that I need to know who to speak with and how to speak with? And one of the wolves that we're dealing with right now, and it's not a negative connotation, but it is, because we are looking at this funding mechanism that due to the COVID-19 and the pandemic is creating a lot of inequity. And the inequity was there, and it's just making this inequity grow. It's making it just, unfortunately, spread, and it's becoming more and more. So you also have to learn, and this is where I come in as a superintendent. I've learned to speak bilingually to my legislators, to my state legislators, and to the congressional legislators that we have as well. And so I think that's really important for you in your role, because elected officials need to hear from classroom teachers. They need to hear from program directors. They need to hear from parents. They really do. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are. I have the pleasure, also in my role of being a district level superintendent, but I'm also the co-chair of a national cohort through the School Superintendents Association, through the AASA. It's an early learning cohort that serves over now 12,000 members and 50 million public school students nationwide. The cohort has 75 superintendents, office staff, principals, and education professionals from 17 states. Waterford Research Institute is an official sponsoring partner, as is Standards for Success. Both of these organizations have been just great to work with. And we created a vision statement of the early learning cohort. Now, you got to remember, these are superintendents who have a vested interest, and central office employees who have vested interest in education. And it took us 2 hours of time to come up and have 4 words that mattered most, which is early childhood matters most. And we believe that to its core. And so one of our partners, Waterford, helped us secure a grant of $14.2 million to expand to rural districts. So not only now do we have suburban and urban, but we also have rural districts. My district is considered a rural district, but being in Michigan, people sometimes don't equate that with having a rural situation. And I know in the state of Illinois, from where many of you are from, there are definitely rural parts of Illinois. And so we have to make sure that all of our partners, from an equitable standpoint, are being woven into this conversation. So a big partner too, and this was a big deal, is the Office of Head Start. And I know a lot of you have connections, either friends or colleagues, or some of you might actually be working for agencies that use the Head Start grant. And I know that this is a huge deal for us, for me, but having gotten the chance to work directly with the Office of Head Start has been just tremendous. So I was invited to a summit in Washington, D.C. In the summer of 2018. It was convened by the Office of Head Start, where they brought together elementary building principals and Head Start program directors into one space. And there's a lot of mistrust, unfortunately, that was existing and currently still is, but they've done a lot to work on this. And the idea is sometimes public schools think they do a better job at educating students than Head Start. And Head Start gets offended because they believe they're raising families and children out of poverty, which is exceptional. That's what you want. You want those partnerships to blossom and grow. So we made sure as a cohort to keep them as partners. And so who doesn't like Clifford the Big Red Dog, right? So back in November of 2019, we had our cohort meeting, and in the picture with me is Amanda Bryans and Kristen Kane, two, I guess you'd call like executive managers within OHS. And then on the right-hand side, the picture is with Yasmina Vinci, the executive director for the National Head Start Association, and then Dr. Deb Bergeron, who is the federal program director. And I know that Dr. B and Yasmina and I and the colleagues that I have in my cohort have really tried to work together. And then the picture on the bottom is one of our gatherings. It was in Hillsborough County, Florida, in April of 2019. And it just shows that we are meeting, we are coming together, we're really trying to focus in on how do we make differences for kids. And so when we had the opportunity to have the OHS launched a program called the School Collaboration Demonstration Project, they selected 13 districts from around the nation and built these partnerships and brought in the Head Start provider, brought in the local school district, and then talked about how are we going to make a difference with these wildly important goals and making these concentrated efforts. So these 13 districts really worked on that partnership. And now that work has been spread out throughout the rest of the nation. And now there are states that are really attempting to kind of scale that model so that schools and districts can work together and making differences and transitioning their children from the Head Start program to a public school setting, which is really important. And so the reason I'm bringing this up to you all today is you have that ability on a very local scale. You have that ability to go to your local district or districts that you might work with and say to them, how can we be a better partner with you so that when we transition our students from programs that we have over to programs that you have? And I think that's really important. So this is Together at Last, unprecedented. December 17th of 2019, the School Superintendents Association, the Office of Head Start, and then the National Association for Elementary School Principals entered into a historic groundbreaking memo of understanding, or what they call an MOU. And it was signed at the Higher Horizons Head Start and Early Head Start in Falls Church. And it really talked about bringing together these 3 national agencies and all of their subsidiaries on a state level, bringing them together to work. So one of the things that I really want to focus you on is making sure that if you have the ability to welcome school personnel from your local districts into your programs at any point, and I know that they have targeted, Head Start is targeted, bring your principal or superintendent to Head Start each October. So this is something we have to look forward to this coming October, So you could potentially piggyback off of that or dovetail off of that to say, hey, we want to take a part in that too. And that would be a really neat thing for everyone to be able to do. And then there is the article. It's from the Education Dive resource. And I believe it was one of the resources that I had given to Partner Plan and ACT before this presentation. So you have a copy. So who and what is on social media? So this is a big deal, right? And if you want to follow me, there's my Twitter account. And I have a hashtag, and our organization has hashtags. And I just know that this is ways to connect, right? And so if you have something that you wanted to share, you know, make sure you share it on social media or do what you need to on Facebook. But one of the things, the other reason why I like this is because you get ideas by doing. And so this poster that you see on this page was one that we specially and specifically created as a district, where we actually wrote and gained permission and approval for the 5 position statements from the National Association for the Education of Young Children to be on my school district's poster. And so we have that now, and our early childhood program, of which we have a state-run preschool program, and we also have a Head Start program, we have Young Fives, and we have our kindergarten programs, where I try to maintain a class ratio. We try to maintain a class ratio of somewhere in the range of 20 to 1. I know the NEYC's position statement says 18 to 1, but we're doing the best we can. And then one of the great things that I was going to talk a little bit more about later is the fact that I've also built relationships with those in my county. And we have now, next year for the 2020-21 school year, as a county, family engagement specialists. They're going to focus and laser focus in on building relationships with families from birth through age 3. That is so important, that you have to have those relationships. And if you currently are a provider that's on this call that works in that age demographic, then you know what I'm talking about. You have to make sure that you're making differences with those families at that age, and also those children, providing them the right environment to make sure that they can love, that they feel loved, and that they can grow in that environment is very important. So regardless, you know, that's the poster. So what can you do? What are some things that you can do to become an early childhood education amplifier? You got to learn to advocate for your children and families who do not have a voice. And one of the things that I've been really fortunate to talk to lots of different school districts around the nation with is your zip code and any child's zip code should not define the level of instruction or the quality of instruction that they receive. We have to give a voice to those that are voiceless. That is our responsibility. That is the call. And then we need to generate higher degrees of ecosystems in your region of your country. So if you're on the call, let's say you register for this conference and you're from another part of the nation and you're somewhere else, you have that ability. Or if, let's say you're in Illinois, it's time to really kind of gather. And I know this organic group that you belong to now, this conference, is a great way. And that's one of the neat things about these virtual conferences is you get to be a part of something that's on a national scale that may not have been possible before. You have the ability now to do that. The only downside is not doing the face-to-faces, all of the social nuancing with social networking, right? So we can't actually have the ability to connect. And then you need to make sure to lay the foundation in how to engage your local school district. So that means understanding what steps, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is what are some things that you can do to weasel your way in or get the squeaky oil that gets the grease? What are you able to do to make sure that you are being heard? We're going to talk about that. Then understand your district's approaches to early childhood education and how to improve them. And we talked about learning to speak bilingually, and we'll talk about that more. And I don't mean, you know, an actual language. I mean understanding, speaking the language of the heart, understanding, fighting fiction with fact. So, and then the other thing that's a thread throughout this conference, throughout the organization, is the idea of equity. And I know that the National Association for Superintendents, that is their theme for this coming year, is equity is the mission. And we have to make sure that we're paying very careful attention to that as we move our processes forward. So more questions. Okay. So in the chat feature, this is where we get to be a little interactive. You didn't think you were going to just sit there. Hopefully I didn't think you would. But do you know who your local superintendent is, and have you met him or her? So in the chat feature, I need you right now if you have the ability to type yes or no. I would love to see a lot of yeses, and if you haven't, that's fine, but let's see if we have lots of yeses. Ooh, I see lots of yeses coming in. Awesome. Any more? Keep going. Oh, there's a bunch of no's. Yep, some yeses. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, I'm so proud. Excellent. Oh, good job. And that's so important that you have that ability to meet and talk to this individual. They are accessible. They are a public servant. They are in the mindset of what you believe in. They want to do things well. Now, in the rare circumstance that you are working with a district that has a very large structure, if you're in the Chicago public school system, or if you're in a different part of the nation where there's just these exceptionally large districts, we as a cohort have visited some of these districts, and these districts are enormous. Hillsborough County Schools has 235,000 students. It's the 8th largest district in the nation. This last spring, we were supposed to go to the 2nd largest school district in the nation, but we weren't able to be there. And I just know that there's stratifications there. So if you can't meet the superintendent, there's clearly an office of people that you can meet with. So I would encourage you to do that. So that's really important. So thank you all for sharing. And I did see a lot of yeses. I did see some no's. So maybe that can be your audience on your sheet that you're hopefully going to design today, of developing your elevator speech. On the line that's just above where you're going to write your draft, you could put superintendent of local district. You could put that down, or of the districts that you serve. Okay, so research, resources, the toolkit, and action. So I really appreciate this particular picture. And I was a part of a virtual call about 2 weeks ago where one of the presenters had this on their presentation, so I was able to borrow it. But it says, schools can't solve challenges related to the pandemic alone. Who are your partners? And you need to make sure that you're connecting with those individuals as best you can, so you have the ability to make sure that you are realizing in your ecosystem who are the people that you have. So as a superintendent, with the pandemic, we have a school opening task force. And if any of you are aware of Dr. Hetty Chang's work for attendance work, from Attendance Works, I would highly advise you to become part of that, because she encourages you as an organizer to be involving your parents. And so on our school opening task force, we not only have parents, I've got grandparents, I've got students, we've got administration, teachers, community members, Board of Ed members, you name it. We want to make sure that their voices are being heard as we approach what it could look like with the return to school. But with any challenges, and so I also heard a friend of mine recently say, well, BC and AC, right? So it's not what you think. It's before coronavirus and after coronavirus. And I really, truly believe that school systems and systematic teaching and learning will have a BC and AC approach. I think because of this pandemic, it's really causing us to take deliberate intent and look at how we're educating our children and what we're doing best to meet the needs that they have. So we have to make sure that we're doing the things necessary to meet the needs of our students and to individualize the instruction as best we can. So let's see if I can continue to advance my slide. Hold on. There we go. So defining early learning. Okay, so this is a big deal. And I know that I have my handy dandy copy of my Green Bible. So I know that you can probably see this too. And you know that this is the 3rd edition, right? And you can see how much I use this. But this is the AASA, and I know a lot of professionals and researchers use birth through age 8 as defining what early learning is. And I know I would expect that each of you understand this. But it also encompasses the whole child. And I think this is something that our legislators and people that may not have the experience that you or I have in early learning understand, that it truly is about reaching a social emotional level, a bodily kinesthetic level, an academic readiness level. All of those things are things that we have to consider when dealing with the whole child. And this means looking at our work with a new lens. And so one of the things that I think is really important is shifting the mindset. So if you have the ability of knowing an elementary building principal, because these individuals are the frontline workers that do connect programs with students and teachers with students. I have a stratification in my job where I'm relying on those principals to make sure that they're doing a good job of giving the teachers their instructional needs that they have. But we need to start redefining, instead of calling our schools K-12 schools, we really need to start redefining them and start calling them P20 institutions. Because from prenatal through age 20, because if we end up having super seniors, we need to make sure that, and also with dual enrollment and other ideas of having there be extended learning opportunities for those students that are older. But then from a prenatal standpoint, we really need to make sure that we are reaching those families prior to them coming, because 90% of a child's brain develops before the age of 5. So by the time that a school district receives a student, either in kindergarten or maybe a Young Fives program, most of that child's development from a brain structural standpoint is already developed. And we need to make sure that we have the ability to offer support to families, to foster families, to grandparents, to adults that are raising children. All of those people matter. We have to come up and make sure that we are doing everything we can to make those differences for those kids. And then the Michigan Department of Education has three essentials that I know that I have learned to embrace. And those are making sure that we as a district are really working toward that. And, you know, it's based on early literacy. We want to make sure we're having early literacy, encompassing the whole child. And that's where our state has adopted the Association for Supervision of Curriculum and Development, the ASCD, the organization that kind of supervises that nationally. They have a model for the whole child. And I just know that that was really important for the state of Michigan to kind of embrace. And just about a month ago, I know that family frameworks are very important too, and engaging families. So my state had developed a family engagement framework, and I know that other states have those already in place. And if you don't know your state's family engagement framework, you're going to want to make sure to reach out and find that. And then picking up partners along the way. This is where you, in your leadership role that you have as a teacher or as an administrator, or you know, potentially even as a parent, bringing together and harnessing these really wise partners. And one of the most untapped partnerships I think that exists in education today is the partnership that you can develop with your local PBS station. If you think about what's the most trusted source for children's educational programming that we have in our nation today, it truly is PBS. In fact, Molly of Denali, this new cartoon that a friend of mine, Dr. Nell Duke, a researcher from the University of Michigan, started with PBS, and she helped to kind of create. It just won the Peabody Award for its wonderful emphasis on having a culturally representative figure. It's the first time in the history of cartoons or in animation that a lead character for a television series has been, you know, it was an Alaskan individual that has Alaskan heritage, Molly. And I'm so proud of her and the work that they've done. So those are things that I'll talk a little bit about later as well. But just making sure that you connect and having the ability to connect. I'm very fortunate too in my role that my county and my state have structures, and I know because you're a part of this, that you have them as well, that really reaching out to those tentacles and thinking about those thought partners that you can incorporate. And that means faith-based organizations, that means civil service organizations, government agencies. The sky's the limit. Things, you know, business partnerships, making sure you have those connections as well. You want to make sure. So some great resources and connections. So this is where I get to do a little show and tell. So this book, if you haven't read it, From Cradle to Kindergarten, there's a collection of authors, and Dr. Christina Weiland is from the University of Michigan, but she's fantastic. Later in the presentation, there is another author, Dr. Tim Bartik. We're going to hear from him. There's a video I want to be able to show. And then the last resource that I wanted to just briefly talk about, and it's one of the first, is why is there a crisis? Why is there a crisis with learning? Why is there a crisis in childcare today? And I just said 90% of the brain development occurs in the first 5 years of life. And this is the problem. The lower the age of the student, the lower the age of the child. So if you are an infant toddler childcare worker, that means your salary is lower. And that there's an age penalty that exists for every educational level for teachers. That means The people that make the least in education right now are preschool and toddler teachers. And then it goes up from there. And partly because it has to do with how it's structured from a licensing standpoint, correct? Because in an agency or a center or an organization or at a home, you have to have a lower ratio because those students, those children, those babies need to have personalized attention so that it takes more employees to offer quality care. And therefore, if you're running it from a business perspective, then you have to have more workers to meet the demands of having more children in those slots to fill it. And that is so, you got to flip that model. And that's what I've been trying to talk with my local legislators with, is to say, these individuals need to be paid the most. This is so important that we give these individuals the most money that we can. And so in the grant of the program that I've put together for my county, I can pull together the 10 public districts in Monroe County, and our Monroe County Superintendents Association has created an early childhood plan. They're all now just starting to sign on the master agreement for this. And we've written a grant through the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation. We're hiring family engagement specialists who are going to work with these birth through age 3 families in our community. And we're trying to pay them a really, really good salary because we want the best possible people to be able to work with those families and connecting them to our local districts and offering them chances to connect. So a couple statistics though from our state, and I'm not satisfied with, and nor should you be, because these are very similar if you look at different states' models, that only 56% of our third graders are not proficient or partially proficient on our state English language arts testing. And of that ratio then in 4th grade and 5th grade, you can see that also. I'm not comfortable having the majority of our students either score not proficient or partly proficient on a statewide basis, nor should you. And that's why we need to make sure that we're championing things and understanding how to take this to others and communicating them and the power of positive communication. What can we do to make a difference? So in the book From Cradle to Kindergarten, I don't know if you knew this, but that the crisis affects everyone from middle class to low socioeconomic status families. And currently there is a 3-to-1 spending ratio in the difference for childcare. That means that for a family who is of low socioeconomic status, they are spending 3 times the amount of their total volume of their income on high quality childcare than that of a middle class family. And that has to stop. We have to reverse this trend. That has to be done. So low socioeconomic status families are 21%, they're paying 21% of their income level if they are in sending their children to childcare, and that high socioeconomic status families are only spending 7% of their income. So if you have to make the choice between serving food on your table or having your child in quality childcare, every time food is going to win, right? Every time if you're a parent. And that just, unfortunately, for families to have to make that choice, that is a challenging choice. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to combat that. This is an equity issue. The U.S. lags behind in public investments for birth through age 5. We're 30th out of 32 nations in enrollment for ages 3 and 4, meaning that we out of the industrialized nations of the study that are presented in this book, we're 30th out of 32 nations in the amount of families that are sending their children for high quality childcare. And that is creating a big learning gap potentially for us that are in public education or for you in your programs that you're in. And the gap is widening. This is unfortunately evident between high socioeconomic status families and low socioeconomic status families. The middle class is being stretched way thin, and we've got to do things to battle that and combat that. So Tim Bartek, who wrote the book Investing in Kids, he's an economist from the Upjohn Institute. I was able to hear him almost 10 years ago. He's been out for a while, but he talks a little bit about, and this is a very important phrase, and you might want to take this one down as a note on your page that you have for your elevator speech. It's called return on investment. And it's really interesting because when you talk to legislators, they know that word. They know those words. And if you can walk into a meeting and say, a return on investment, if a state invests in quality pre-K programming for a state on a statewide level, it will give you a 3-to-1 return on investment. And in some circumstances, and Dr. Bartek talks about in the video that we're about to show, it could be much higher. So I'm going to let Grace,
Yep.
if you want to show the video clip,
yep,
go ahead.
Go ahead and launch it. Then, Eddie, if you could mute yourself when the video is playing, then feel free to unmute afterward.
Okay, thank you. It's about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Okay, so you can hear Dr. Bartik. That is about a 15-minute talk, but I know that we, for time limitations, did not want to spend the length of time to have that be something that was going to take up all the time. But you get the idea that, you know, he has obviously the theory behind why making an investment in early childhood education makes a difference. And it's a powerful argument. And I know that James Heckman, in another piece of research and resource that I'm about to share with you, also comes to a similar conclusion. So another item that I really wanted to talk today about is this whole idea of equity. And a good friend of mine, her name is Miss Susan Friedman, and she is the author, I'm trying to locate the book, of along with Alyssa, and it's Each and Every Child, Teaching Preschool with an Equity Lens. And in this book, they talk about equity as a journey, and that it's our job, you know, as professionals, that we obviously, it meets teachers where they are, because each of us has our own journey in equity. And we need to make sure that we are understanding that journey and are able to identify where we are as professionals, so that then when we are interacting with others, that is a really important aspect of how we approach our interactions with families. And to support the schools along the path, and then maps to creating an equity position statement, which I know the NEYC has done. Another really good resource that didn't make it into the presentation is a book by Shane Saphir, and it's called The Listening Leader. And that book also talks about, and much like this book does, understanding your own equity journey is so important, and embracing that, because then that allows you to look through your own lens as you approach your relationships and your understanding of how others are using their positions. And then you can meet them. And one of the things that in the book, The Listening Leader, they talk a lot about is the fact that just by sometimes individuals' inability to listen with an open heart, that can cause some, you know, negative communication that can creep into a situation. So that if somebody doesn't smell right, let's say you have a family you're servicing that, you know, for whatever reason, you know, personal hygiene is a challenge for them. And I can remember doing this when I was a classroom teacher. I did home visits, and one time I visited a family, and unfortunately this little girl had some teeth that were rotted, and there were some, you know, hygiene issues, and she would come to school clean, but you could tell that there was some challenges there. And I just really wanted to know more about she and her family, so I was able to make a visit. And by visiting the family, it gave me such a greater appreciation and perspective on what, it opened my heart. It opened my ability to see with my eyes wide open how much this child needed the love and nurturing environment that I was creating. And by doing that, it gave me a better fulfillment of being a service and being of service to this family. And I think that we sometimes get caught up in our dailiness, and sometimes, you know, we will have situations where we either supervise teachers, or we might ourselves might be a teacher, and we forget that as a part of this process. So we have to keep that in mind. So one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about was the developmentally appropriate equity position statement that the NEYC has put in place. And it's a focus on equity. There's a hashtag there for social media, equity and ECE. Each and every child, birth through age 8, has the right to equitable access to high quality early childhood programs in centers, family child care homes, or schools that fully support their optimal development and learning across all domains of development. Knowing what is individually appropriate, learning about each child's interests, abilities, and developmental progress. And so I have a poster that you might have seen that I don't know if you can display, but I don't know if I unshare my screen, or you can see me, or you can still see me. So Grace, I don't know if you can still see me or not, because I can't see myself. But okay, good. So I'm looking at my presentation, but you can see that this is the poster that the NAYC, and it's really important that this says, you know, I am blank, and I stand with NAYC to advance equity in ECE. And I know that this whole conference, if you've been lucky enough to participate since Monday, and then I know there's really great presenter following me today, and then I know there's an amazing keynote presenter that's happening tomorrow. But this is just an example of that. You don't have to use the NAYC's equity thing, but if you have the ability in your location, in your organization, to create something like this, or to actually use this because it is NAYC, but then you could put this down there that says, you know, I am a, and you could say, for me, I would say superintendent, or I am a teacher, or I am a, you know, listener, I am a leader, or you could just put your name, you know, you could say, I am a superintendent, Edward Manuzak, and I stand with NAYC to advance equity and early childhood education. And that doesn't just mean, and we've already touched on it a little bit, about the issue with payment, right? Because that's a big deal. Equity of payment for our staff is really important. But then there's also the idea of, you know, so many different areas of equity, which we'll explore here in a bit. So this is that position statement, and that all children have the right to equitable learning, and that is the right, and that we should support to fulfill this mission, and that I believe all children have a right to equitable learning opportunities, and all ECE educators have a professional obligation to advance equity. That's so very important. So, you know, if you were thinking about, and I'm coming back to this now because I know some of you might be working on your language for your elevator speech, that could be something that you could add into your 50 words or less statement, that you want to say something about equity. That's a very important thing, that you could say you stand and it's an obligation, or that you're an advocate or an ally of equity. That's so important. So another tool to implement equity, this is an anti-bias education offering it's the second edition. The first edition was ahead of its time, but the author taught at the Perry Preschool Project. And for those of you that are unaware of this wonderful research that came out of Ypsilanti, Michigan, where they did a longitudinal study of children that went through a program at the Perry Preschool. And so they followed these students in a longitudinal study, and now they've done it to where these children are now adults, and now their children are growing to be adults as well. And they're showing how it is possible to break systems of inequality. It is possible, but it has to take the efforts of systemic change. And to do that, you need to offer, the first step is to have a high quality childcare experience, or high quality early childhood education experience for children, because the incarceration rate goes down, the recidivism rate of those that are incarcerated is lower, higher wages are earned, higher educational levels are attained, better quality of health, better quality of life is something that also goes into this. And those are things that matter. This is what we do this job for. It matters. And we need to continue to do those jobs that are educating and making sure that we're advocating for these levels of programs. And it just, I tell you, it broke my heart, because there is a local public school district in Michigan. We have a state-run preschool, and it's called Great Start. And due to the budget constraints that each of our districts in our state are experiencing, in the state of Michigan, each pupil, we get money for each pupil that we enroll. And we have we're estimating a $700 prorated cut, not for next school year, for the current school year that's just ending. So we have that on top of the other challenges we have. And this district decided not to do their preschool program, for the state-run preschool program for those children. And my heart is broken. And they're getting a new superintendent. And so my job, after I'm done with you all today, is I'm going to call that superintendent personally today that I know. He's a new superintendent coming into that district. And I'm going to work with him and try to educate him to say, have you considered the value of this? Do you understand that there's a 3-to-1 investment on this return? You need to educate your Board of Education who voted against this. And you need to work hard to get this program back. It is worth the time and effort and the energy to make that happen. And we need to. That's important. So regardless, we need to make sure that this resource, the Anti-Bias Education book, does have a trainer and facilitator's guide. So if you were interested, this is also on the resources within NAYC that you can tap into. So equity is the mission, right? So this is another one of those photos from that seminar I was a part of a couple weeks ago, that equity must be central. And it's hard to see, but it says, you know, equality, and it looks like, okay, because equality and equity are not the same. Equity is something that's different. Equality says you're giving everything to everyone and you're not making any necessary adjustments to make those so that it's equitable. And so the first picture shows everyone standing on a box, an adult, a child, and then a toddler. And they're all equal, right? Everyone has a box to stand on. And then the second picture, it shows how it could be equitable. So that the boxes are shifted to give everyone the same vantage point. The reality, unfortunately, is that sometimes people are given, you know, older individuals, like older students, are given more resources, and that students that might be younger are given one resource, and infants and toddlers and those in early childhood education don't have a box to even stand on. They're actually in a hole. Success, though, is when all the barriers are gone. That's when you know that equity has been reached. So there's a great article from 0 to 3, and it's actually a year old. And the author points out that, you know, parents help construct positive self-identity. Self-identity begins at 18 months, you know, and under. So that's where, you know, individuals, you know, boys and girls begin to identify who they are by their surroundings and who they interact with. Gender identity begins between 2 to 2.5 years old, you know, and then racial identity begins between 3 and 4 years old. And that's why, I don't know if you were a part of this, but if you saw that on last Saturday, CNN and Sesame Street did a joint town hall meeting, and it was probably one of the most fantastic explanations of racism and of protesters that I could have ever seen. Elmo's having a conversation with his dad, Louie, and they're talking about racism. It's a 2.5-minute video. You should really want to try and tune in to watch it. And then I would, if I were in a program today that had children, or I would figure out a way to be able to share or show this. I think it's just absolutely brilliant. And if you follow me on Twitter, I know that I had mentioned this, and I think I even retweeted it, but it's just such an easy resource. But this article is a really good article, and it does offer 6 helpful tips that you can implement to help connect your program or you and your ideas that you have. And those are: make connections between the story and your child's life. These are for parents. Choose stories with diverse characters that are rich with diverse characters. And then the article, they provide a list of those. Give your child a chance to share their perspective. As you share stories, focus on what's the same, just not what's different. Give your child a chance to predict what will happen next or what they will do in the story, and make connections to your family values and beliefs. And so those are really important things I think we need to be very mindful of as we continue our mission. And then another aspect of this whole pandemic, and this is true of any situation, is trauma. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, it's created a glaring inequitable aspect with trauma, because, you know, it's funny because I just had a conversation with our county's Department of Health and Human Services coordinator, and they said their number of reports for neglect and abuse are down. And unfortunately, they're being underreported because students aren't in school. And so I know that this is causing some trauma. So we have to make sure that we're putting things in place when we return to school. They're going to deal with emotional trauma. And we have to assess, and we don't assume. Develop a long-term recovery plan. And you got to make sure you're providing professional development and also the emotional care for the adults that are in your charge. One of the things my district is going to explore, and we're seriously considering, is for the employees of our district, we need to offer childcare that is safe and that will offer, it'll be consistent, so that if we end up coming back to a hybrid approach or a face-to-face learning opportunity in the fall, that our staff know that their children are going to be looked after. And that, I think, will send a clear message on the importance to our public that we have as an organization to the health and quality care that we're offering our teachers in my district. So I would encourage all of my colleagues around the nation to be able to do similar things if they already aren't doing that. So this is a really good research report as well. So I'm trying to throw these all at you in a matter of time. And this is not something that is in the handouts, but it's easy to find if you just type into the any type of online search engine. But it's David Jacobson from EDC. He's run a really great report about building first 10 schools and communities. And education equity requires communities to do 4 things. And those 4 things are: ensure that all children have opportunities and supports that enable their educational success; eliminate the predictability of success or failure that currently correlates with any social, economic, or cultural factor, including race; identify and end inequitable practices. Quite honestly, I think this is the one that's the biggest challenge, is that it's people like myself, people that look like me, that need to step in and say enough, that this needs to end. So I know that my community, where I have my school district is, we are doing everything we can. I know that we have a student-led diversity team that is in the high school level that we're looking for ways to explore, so we have students teaching students about equity practices next year, and I think that's important. So
Eddie,
create inclusive environments for both.
Eddie, just a question on that while you just were talking about what you all are doing. There's a question from the audience about, I'm wondering how you elevate voices of people of color in your role as superintendent.
That's a great question. So I had the pleasure in my midwinter conference, and I thought this was brilliant, where they had a student-led portion of our superintendent's conference where they brought in students of color, and they gave testimonials in front of the entire superintendent group. And so I, 3 years ago, in my district, helped to organize this diversity awareness club for our high school students. And I just sat and listened as the leader of the organization and allowed them to talk, and taking what they had said and then letting it then apply to practices that we have in the district. And by giving them a direct form of communication to a leader that is willing and able to listen with empathy and also with purpose. I think that's really important. You can say you're listening, but if you're not listening with empathy and with purpose, then you're not listening. And so you have to be able to apply that. And so that's why I really think that the more that, and another practice that I do about trying to amplify those voices are, if there is, and this is Diversity Club also incorporates gender identity and sexual identity as well. So then these students are also able then to engage in allowing them to have their voices heard. And so then this group then has programs throughout the course of the year that they were able to offer and allow staff and allow students to interact with them. And my community is unfortunately very underrepresented with minorities. We have a very small percentage of minorities in our district. And that's where there is, unfortunately, some in my community that are resistant to these equitable practices. And that's why we must take the stance as educators to then show we are united, and we will stand elbow to elbow with anyone in making sure that their voices are heard. So that's a great question. So this is that research that I talked about that had James Heckman in it, and it's called Foresight and Law: Why the K-12 World Hasn't Embraced Early Learning. And it does mention in there that, you know, he's a Nobel Prize winning economist, that investment in young children is most likely to be effective if made earlier. Birth through age 3 services are actually the best opportunities to make substantial differences. And that's why we need to make sure that we're doing that as a county. And that was something that, with the tool that I'd created, that I'm going to talk about here in just 1 second, it really shined a light on, as a county, we were not doing a good job in trying to reach out to that demographic of those individuals in our county. And then this is also something that I thought was very interesting, that if you wanted to know about, is that the National Association of Elementary School Principals, that only 20% of elementary school principals that were surveyed shared that they were confident in their knowledge of children from birth through age 8. And I can tell you right now that percentage is even much lower for superintendents. So guess whose job it is to communicate in a positive manner about early learning and early childhood? Yours. You have to take it under your responsibility to make sure, because the cavalry is not coming to do this. It's up to you. So this is that tool that I had developed as part of my PhD research, but I had worked on this now for over 2 years, and now it's being published by Standards for Success, and it's being co-branded by the AASA Early Learning Cohort and the AASA organization. So that this tool measures in 4 age demographics from birth to age 3, preschool and young 5s, kindergarten, grades 1 through 3. There's 53 total indicators, 19 resources it currently uses in its first version. It has a direct superintendent's questionnaire. And then there are 5 key areas that it measures, which are high success, moderate success, low success, marginal success, and no success. And what it does, it allows a district to get a sense of how am I meeting the needs of our families and our children that are in these age demographics. And as a county, when we use this resource as a county, 8 of the 10 school districts in my county scored a 0 in birth through age 3. We were not doing enough to make a difference in that age demographic. So we are doing something about it next year and the following year. It's a 2-year grant cycle, and we're going to try and continue this as we move forward. So finally, we have a national platform to collect and synthesize district-level data for early learning in public schools, something that is not and has not been done in the past, something I'm really excited to be able to do. And so they'll measure in different fields, so like urban, suburban, rural, or even densely urban areas, and then based on the size of a district and the volume of the readiness volume of this, because it ties resources to outcomes, which is really helpful. So this is another one, your trusted team. I mentioned this about PBS. Detroit PBS was awarded the very prestigious 2019 NETA National Award for Educational Excellence. They developed a program called Preschool U. It's a parent training module program that they went into some of the poorest neighborhoods in Detroit, and then also in Ypsilanti, and it's working with families, working with adults, and it's a 5-week, 2-hour training where they then incentivized it by offering different things to get the families to come in. This model is something that I've woven into our early childhood plan in Monroe County. And then also they have a national Bright by Text campaign. So you in Illinois can take advantage of this, so that you would contact Detroit PBS, say, how do I sign up for the national Bright by Text campaign? And what it does is, on a cell phone, because they have leveraged their market share, Detroit Public Television and their programming at educational levels, they get 16 million views a month on their cell phones with the streaming they do with their services. That's enormous. And so they have a text messaging system that by zip code, and I signed up as a parent of a 1-year-old. And so I get text messages 2 to 3 times a week that give me really helpful pointers about having a 1-year-old. And then it gives you little information that you just tap on the link and it goes directly to that resource. And what's cool about this is, by your zip code then, you can share this with your families, and then you can push out informational messages to those families that sign up for this service. So this is what I've done in my county and in my district. We're trying to use this as a service so that we can push out developmentally appropriate messages that offer resources to families, because many families have smartphones now. So the last question, okay, we're running out of time, but I got one more question for you. Okay, get ready to enter your information in the text chat, okay? We've got about 10 minutes left. I got to go through this next portion really quickly. So, have you called your state or congressional elected official within the last 3 months? Please type yes or no in the chat feature. And I'm really hoping I see no. Oh, I see some few no's. Okay, you got to do this. You got to make sure, maybe that could be your audience that you have that you're going to try and reach. You know, you got to make sure. I see some no's, but you got to make sure that you're typing, maybe your audience on this sheet right here is going to be an elected, congressional elected official or your state elected official. So keep that going. I really appreciate everyone answering their questions in to either yes or no. And if you are a yes person, awesome. If you're a no person, you're still awesome, because I know that you're going to do it. You need to do it. That's very important. So advocacy into action. Simon Sinek, who he's an educational leader, says a quote that says, leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those in your charge. And we really need to do that now more than ever, especially in today's day and age. So here's a couple of really fun photos. I'm a big Peanuts fan. And of course, what does she do every time, Charlie Brown tries to, Lucy takes the football away, and he always misses the football, right? But he never stops him from trying again. And then the other cartoon is, it's a bootstrap company, and it says, sorry, you'll have to pull yourself up if you want those. And that's my point. No one's coming to help you. I mean, if you think that the federal government is coming, they have a little bit, but you've got to take it on the responsibility on yourself to do something and be positive about it. And organizations like this one are here to assist you in that journey. Another great organization, it's kind of like the ancillary arm, it's the advocacy arm of the NEYC, is called America for Early Ed. There is a child care crisis in this country. And so there has been a request by Representative Clark, and now that number has actually been cut in half. Instead of $100 billion, they might be able to get a $50 billion bill through. But there is a $9.6 billion a month help is needed for childcare around the nation. And there's an article from the Boston Globe that was in your resource pack that talks about this really insignificant issue. And then OHS received an additional $750, so Office of Head Start in the ESSER's money received additional money, along with the Bureau of Indian Education, which is significant. So the cohort, the whole purpose is to bring superintendents from across the country together to review emerging research, discover early learning best practices, and plan together to facilitate positive change. You can see the thought partners that we've developed, and some of them are true partners as well. So this is an important page because this shows you a number of times that we've met and the advocacy teams we have, but we also have Twitter chats and webinars. And so if you want to become a part of that, you just have to show up. So on Twitter, it's hashtag AASA Early Ed, and our next one is June 24th at 1 p.m. And then our next webinar is with Dr. Nell Duke from the University of Michigan, talking about early literacy and how do you handle remote early literacy. And she's fantastic. So that's really important. So there is a short video that does give a highlight to this. And I don't know, Grace, if we have enough time. I want to make sure that we have enough time to go through the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, I'm not sure we'll have enough time.
I think we're going to skip.
Right, and then Eddie, if you could
Yep, I think we're
the comments. There was a comment there. Crystal Elliott said it's hard to look at a prestigious group of all white faces in that photo, given the times and topic. If leadership is still all white, efforts will continue to be incremental at best.
And you are absolutely correct. The photo that I showed you with Dr. Bergeron and Yasmina Vinci and myself were white, and the group photo that we had, the majority of the participants are not of minority status, but we do have a strong representation of minorities within the group and the team. In fact, one of our co-steering committee members is a strong, she's amazing, African-American female, Dr. Barbara Bottoms. She's an elementary building principal from Prince George's County in Maryland. And, we are very cognizant. I am very cognizant of that. And you're absolutely, I couldn't agree more that we need to have individuals in positions of leadership a part of this team. And so I have a good friend, she is Kim Carter. She's superintendent at Battle Creek. And she is African-American female that does amazing work for Battle Creek Public Schools. And so I just know that to be in a position where we have to make systemic change, we have to make sure that minorities are having seats at the table and have leadership positions within any organization. So I agree. But you have to, know that this is something that I know the AASA is committed to with equity in education and making equity be the mission. So good point, actually. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm going to try and take this. Hold on. There we go. And then the last part I just wanted to share with you too is to speak bilingually, meaning that I want to circle back to this so that, making sure you speak the language of the heart. Superintendents must be approached and engaged to advocate to stay within school buildings. So that means your programs that you have, because now more than ever with budget shrinking, and I know the state of Illinois has had some serious budget issues with education for a very long period of time. And we must continue to have the ability to have school buildings that can accommodate, pre-K and, young children's services in their buildings. Rethink and share that every district should be a B20 or a P20 district, so birth through age 20 or pre-K through 20 district. Use your program data to your advantage, meaning that you should understand what your program data is and then be able to share about that. So one of the things I wanted to share was a follow-up, and it's from the book. And this is from the author, Mimi Bronsky-Chainfeld, where she says, I'm afraid that too many distressed educators too often are finding themselves flustered, numb, and dumbstruck by the barrage of hard knocks. I'm afraid that many educators burned up and stressed out have built fragile houses of straw, lost the spirit language and are blown over even by the faintest knock at the door, the slightest threat of a knock. Don't let it happen to you. Because you are bilingual, you can explain with intelligence, clarity, sensitivity to anyone who asks what you are doing at any given moment. You always know what you are doing. And keeping the language of the spirit, the language of the heart, prominent in the life of your class and the lives of your children and yourself. And I think that's words to live by, that we need to make sure that we're representing that on how we progress, you know, and what you can take away from potentially this presentation I gave you today. So your elevator speech, you want to make sure that it comes from the heart. Facts and not fiction. You want to make sure it has data, data, data. It's easy to understand, easy to remember, easy to recite. And that you practice it, you revise it, you recite it. And you want it to be something that you can somewhat pull out, so that if you ever do get caught in an elevator with a prominent individual, you'll take the opportunity to make that difference. But then when you do take the opportunity to connect with your locally elected official, that you do have to have that down pat, so that when you are talking with that individual, that you know your material inside and out. And it's easy to forget that these individuals want to help, but sometimes they're constrained by whatever their dynamic parameters are. But that's where we as a group, as educators, have the ability to make differences for our students. So the plan that we've developed, you know, we have the $310,000 grant. This is something that I've done, and it's, you know, for next year for a B3 families to lead local districts. There are 10 local districts that signed the master agreement. We're using the Buffett Early Childhood Institute as a model. That's out of Nebraska. And I just know that they are doing magnificent work, and they're shrinking the gap between low socioeconomic status achieving and high socioeconomic status achieving students. And we began the work in December of 2018. So with that being said, the light is at the end of the tunnel, and I hope that my little, you know, picture here brings a smile to your face, because I certainly know that each of you are doing amazing work. So keep doing that amazing work. And I'll turn things back over to Grace. And I know that she has, I think it's a feedback or a comment form or a survey of some type.
Thank you, Eddie. Give virtual round of applause. Appreciate it. You could get a moment, you can look through the chat and see there's been a lot of engagement, questions, and feedback as well. And attendees, just as a reminder, you will, the evaluation link is in the chat box, but you will also get a follow-up email with the materials as well as the evaluation link. We do read your responses, and we want to be as responsive as possible, so please do share your thoughts with us. We always appreciate that. And then we also have our keynote address this afternoon at 1:30. So if you haven't registered, I encourage you to do that. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Grace, is it okay if I just thumb through some of the comments on the chat before I sign off?
Yep, I'm going to keep it on for a minute. I'll just mute and come off.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for allowing me the chance to present today.